In the chamber of the House of Representatives, as he made his way to the podium on the Democratic side, a figure with a look of barely concealed disdain stood out sharply. This was a moment that he had been waiting for, with patience and anticipation. A rare opportunity to publicly put Jasmine Crockett in her place, to humiliate her in front of the entire Congress, and to demonstrate his supposed superiority. With deliberate disdain, he called out, "The gentlewoman from Texas." His voice suffused with condescension and mockery. "Seems to believe she possesses greater knowledge of constitutional law than those of us who have studied it rigorously and spent years dedicated to understanding the intricacies of the Constitution. Perhaps she should spend less time sensationalizing her moments in front of cameras and more time learning how government functions in practice." This statement was no accidental remark. It was an outright attack, a calculated attempt to dismiss and belittle her publicly. The words carried a necessary tone of personal insult, designed to make her feel small and, ideally, to silence her voice. Such tactics are often employed on the political stage to shame opponents into silence or submission. The moment resonated through the chamber as some representatives gasped in surprise or disapprovingly smirked at the insult. Meanwhile, the camera operators continued to record every second, capturing the scene for posterity. However, Jasmine Crockett did not capitulate. She didn't avert her gaze or retreat from confrontation. Instead, she stood her ground. Calmly, she adjusted her microphone and offered a smile. Not a nervous one, but a calculated, knowing grin that signaled her readiness to respond. It was a smile that exuded confidence and warned her adversary, without words, that he had just committed a grave mistake. That moment, the pause, the silence that followed, marked the beginning of a significant turnaround. What transpired in the subsequent 3 minutes would go down in congressional history as a defining instance of political resilience. Mike Johnson, who had assumed he would secure easy political points with his swift insult, soon found himself on the receiving end of a comeback so sharp and perfectly executed that the entire chamber was silenced. Even Johnson's own colleagues on the Republican side, later reflecting in private discussions, admitted that he had overstepped and that attacking Crockett in this manner was a miscalculation that would haunt him. This was a turning point. Without delay, Jasmine Crockett delivered a response so compelling and flawlessly articulated that it shattered Johnson's attempt at dominion in that moment. The words she spoke struck the room like a lightning bolt, powerful enough to suspend the usual noise of debates and partisan exchanges, commanding everyone's attention. The impact was such that silent acknowledgement swept across the chamber. Johnson's attempt at a quick rebuke faded into the background as his face showed the first signs of regret and bewilderment, a moment that suggested he realized he was no longer in control. The gravity of what happened next cannot be overstated. It became a defining example of a political comeback brilliance. Records later revealed that the Republican colleagues, who had previously supported Johnson or remained neutral, privately expressed that he had made a critical mistake by challenging her in such a disrespectful manner. The incident marked a clear point of failure for him, illustrating how an ill-advised attack can backfire spectacularly when met with quick wit and resolve. Now, as this captivating exchange unfolds, the audience is invited to reflect on the extraordinary power of words in politics, the ability to turn a hostile moment into a display of strength. The subsequent segment promises to reveal exactly what Jasmine Crockett said that so effectively disarmed Mike Johnson, causing him to look as though he wished he could vanish into the floor beneath him. It's a moment that has already garnered widespread attention as one of the most savage and effective political comebacks ever witnessed within congressional history. Turning our focus to the man at the center of this clash, Mike Johnson, it's important to note who he is and how he rose to his position of influence. Johnson holds the esteemed role of chairing the House of Representatives, arguably the second most powerful position in the legislative branch after the presidency itself. At the age of 52, he is a seasoned former attorney from Louisiana who built his career on serving as a constitutional lawyer representing religious conservative groups. Throughout his professional life, Johnson has argued cases that defended religious freedoms, upheld traditional views on marriage, and championed conservative societal values. His journey to the position of chair was anything but straightforward. Unlike most legislative leaders, who typically rise to prominence through decades of distinguished service, Johnson's ascent was marked by his relatively short tenure in Congress, having been elected only in 2017. Prior to his appointment as chair, he lacked significant leadership experience. He was neither a committee chair nor a prominent legislator responsible for landmark laws. He had not authored or sponsored major legislative initiatives that gained nationwide attention. Outside conservative circles, he was hardly known or regarded as a major political figure. Despite this background, Johnson's rise to leadership was driven not by political popularity or seniority, but by a shared ideological commitment and the unique circumstances of the fractured Republican Party in the 2023 election cycle. When Kevin McCarthy was ousted from the speakership, the Republican conference faced deep divisions and was unable to select a new leader through traditional means. Amid this chaos, Johnson emerged as a compromise candidate, capable of uniting the fragments of the fractured party. His rapid and unlikely rise captured the attention of political observers and demonstrated that, in times of internal party turmoil, even those with comparatively limited political experience can ascend to positions of significant influence if they can bridge ideological divides. Johnson's ascent was atypical for a speaker. The majority of his predecessors had accumulated decades of legislative experience, held high-profile committee positions, and authored major laws. Yet, what Johnson might have lacked in legislative achievements, he more than compensated for with his unwavering ideological stance. He is known for being deeply conservative both socially and economically. An evangelical Christian deeply committed to his faith, Johnson has been outspoken about how his religious beliefs motivate and shape his entire political outlook. He adheres to a strict textual interpretation of the United States Constitution, opposing abortion rights, advocating for traditional marriage, and expressing skepticism regarding the federal government's involvement in social welfare programs. His political identity is rooted in preserving what he considers the essential moral and constitutional foundations of the nation, often aligning with the most conservative elements of his party. From the very beginning of Speaker Johnson's tenure, he endeavored to establish himself as a firm figure of authority and control. He aimed to project a commanding presence, asserting that he was in charge and capable of guiding legislative proceedings. However, despite his intentions, he faced relentless challenges from the outset. The reality of his position was complicated by the fragile numerical balance within the House of Representatives, where the Republican Party held only a slender majority. To put it plainly, his margin was so narrow that he simply could not afford to lose more than a handful of votes on any given issue without risking defeat. This meant that Johnson was constantly engaged in delicate negotiations, trying to keep his far-right members on board with his legislative agenda, often having to make concessions or adjustments just to ensure enough votes for a bill to pass. His task was far from straightforward, as he was subject to the fluctuating loyalties and the uncompromising demands of his most conservative colleagues. At the same time, he was trying to shepherd legislation that would eventually become law, a process requiring compromise, strategy, and sometimes even bending the rules. Moreover, Johnson's awareness of his own political standing was sharp and persistent. He understood all too well that many people scrutinizing his actions, even some within his own party, regarded him as being somewhat in over his head. He was not anyone's first choice for the role of Speaker. He only stepped into the position because all others had failed to secure enough support. His rise was born out of necessity rather than acclaim, leaving him with an underlying sense of insecurity that occasionally manifested in defensiveness. This insecurity sometimes pushed him to overcompensate, leading him to adopt a more aggressive stance in order to assert dominance and control. One glaring manifestation of this tendency was his decision to confront Jasmine Crockett, a move that ultimately proved to be a misjudgment. By the time Johnson directed his focus toward Crockett, she had already cemented her reputation as a significant and formidable figure on the national stage. At the age of 43, this civil rights attorney from Texas had repeatedly made headlines, demonstrating a fierce, unapologetic attitude that challenged powerful opponents and shredded their arguments. Her viral moments included publicly dismantling Nancy Mace with well-documented evidence, questioning Mitch McConnell's cognitive health in a manner that drew widespread attention, and establishing herself as a politician unafraid to stand her ground against anyone. What set Crockett apart and made her especially threatening as an adversary was her extensive, real-world background. She was not merely a politician. She was a seasoned trial lawyer with over 15 years of courtroom experience. She understood how to craft and present a compelling case, skillfully cross-examine witnesses who were hostile or evasive, and deliver closing arguments that could sway even the most skeptical juries or audiences. In addition to her legal prowess, Crockett was a highly knowledgeable constitutional law specialist. Before transitioning into the realm of politics, she spent years defending civil rights, challenging government overreach, and litigating fundamental issues surrounding the First Amendment, due process, and equal protection under the law. Her mastery of constitutional principles went well beyond superficial familiarity. She possessed a deep, substantive understanding of the law, honed through actual courtroom battles and legal arguments, not just the politically convenient talking points that many politicians rely on. Crockett's constituency was the 30th District of Texas, which encompasses parts of Dallas. This district was renowned for its incredible diversity, a microcosm of America itself, where communities mainly consisted of Black and Latino populations, with many working-class and middle-class families striving to improve their lives amid significant challenges. Her constituents faced genuine, tangible struggles related to healthcare access, voting rights, the fairness of the criminal justice system, and economic opportunity. These were not abstract issues to her. They were the core concerns of the people she represented. Her mission in Congress was never to engage in petty politicking or adhere tightly to traditional norms of decorum. Instead, she entered the legislative arena to serve her constituents faithfully and to hold powerful individuals and institutions accountable for their actions. Her track record confirmed her abilities multiple times, proving that she was highly effective at advocating for justice and fairness. Crockett had repeatedly demonstrated her skill at challenging the status quo, her fearless stance making her a figure whom her opponents found difficult to ignore. The scene in which her fortitude was most on display unfolded during a House debate on funding the federal government. On that crucial day, lawmakers were deliberating over a continuing resolution, a temporary measure necessary to keep government operations running, an issue that arose because Congress needed to reach an agreement before existing funding expired, thus avoiding a damaging shutdown. The stakes could not have been higher, as the nation watched to see if Congress could come together sufficiently to prevent chaos and economic disruption. The House, controlled by Republicans, had introduced a proposal that included severe cuts to social programs, restrictive measures on abortion access, and provisions that Democrats considered to be poison pills designed to sabotage the legislation and derail negotiations altogether. In this intense atmosphere, Crockett took to the floor to voice her opposition to the bill. She argued passionately that the legislation would have harmful consequences for working families, especially those in her district and similar communities across the country. She meticulously cited specific provisions within the proposal, explaining in detail how each would likely restrict healthcare access, diminish social safety nets, and disproportionately undermine communities of color. Her speech was filled with conviction, backed by facts and figures, and delivered with a level of detail that underscored her genuine concern for her constituents' well-being. She highlighted that far from protecting the interests of ordinary Americans, the proposed legislation threatened to deepen existing inequalities and hardship, making clear that its passage would be a step backward for the nation's social fabric and democratic values. The atmosphere in the chamber was tense, charged with the palpable energy of an intense political showdown. The members of Congress, representing both sides of the aisle, had gathered in a crowded plenary hall where every word spoken carried significant weight. The cameras from C-SPAN were broadcasting the session live across the nation, capturing every gesture, every expression, every moment of this high-stakes confrontation. Political reporters on the sidelines were meticulously watching, ready to clip and disseminate any dramatic or pivotal remarks that could shape public discourse and influence future debates. In this environment, the issues at stake extended far beyond the immediate proposal being discussed. They symbolized a broader struggle for power, influence, respect, and control within the intricate machinery of Congress. At the center of this storm was Mike Johnson, who, despite his official role as the presiding officer or speaker, was expected to serve as an impartial arbiter of proceedings in the House. His responsibility was to maintain order and fairness, ensuring that debates adhered to procedural rules. Yet, Johnson also served as the leader of the Republican conference, which meant that beneath the official neutrality, there was a tendency, especially under the pressures from the more conservative faction of his party, to adopt a more aggressive stance against opponents, particularly Democrats. Some members of his caucus believed he was too lenient, too eager to compromise with the opposition, and they wanted to see him demonstrate more strength and resolve. They expected their leader to stand firm, to push back assertively against Democratic challenges, and to assert Republican priorities more forcefully. On this particular day, Jasmine Crockett, a young and assertive Democratic representative from Texas, delivered a speech that reflected her passionate stance against a Republican-led legislative proposal. Recognizing an opportunity, Johnson, who held the gavel, chose to intervene, not by invoking a procedural ruling, which would have been a neutral move, but through a personal attack aimed at undermining Crockett's credibility. This tactic was not merely about the content of her speech. It was about sending a message to all present that challenging Republican proposals could be met with hostility and personal discrediting. Crockett's presence and speech symbolized more than just her individual stance. She embodied hope, progress, and the voice of communities historically marginalized and ignored by the political system. As a young Black woman from Texas, an attorney committed to civil rights, her very presence in Congress was a testament to perseverance and determination. She had fought her way into the nation's highest legislative chamber in order to represent vulnerable populations, and she understood the significance of her role. For her, dismissive tactics or personal snipes from the chair weren't just offensive. They were an attack on the very ideals of representation and respect. If she allowed Johnson's disparagement to go unchallenged, it would set a dangerous precedent, signaling that those from marginalized backgrounds could be silenced or discredited at will. Such a message would embolden others to question her authority, to dismiss her arguments, and, importantly, to dismiss the concerns of her constituents, many of whom relied on the programs she defended. This confrontation marked what could be considered the first round of a larger clash of narratives and values. During this initial phase, Crockett approached her obligation with clarity and conviction. Recognized to speak on the ongoing resolution, a legislative measure intended to fund government operation temporarily, she stepped to the Democratic side of the chamber, where she took a firm stance. Her voice, calm yet resolute, rang clearly across the room as she began her critique of the Republican bill. "Mr. Speaker," she started, making it known that she was addressing the presiding officer and the entire chamber. "I rise today to oppose this continuing resolution because it fundamentally betrays the interests and well-being of American families." Her tone was steady, designed to underscore the seriousness of her objections. She proceeded to outline her concerns, holding up a thick, multi-page document, the bill itself, as she spoke. With deliberate emphasis, she highlighted specific sections that revealed the harmful impact of the legislation. On page 47 of the proposed bill, Crockett pointed out, there were cuts to WIC, the Women, Infants, and Children Program, an essential federal initiative providing nutritional assistance to low-income pregnant women and young children. These are vulnerable populations, she explained, and slashing support would have devastating effects on their health and development. Moving further, she cited page 63, which contained provisions reducing Medicaid funding. Such reductions, she explained, would force participating states to trim healthcare services, leaving many Medicaid beneficiaries without vital coverage. She also highlighted page 89, where restrictions on the Title X family planning program threatened to close clinics in underserved areas, clinics that many communities relied upon for reproductive health services. As she laid out these specifics, the Republican members in the chamber visibly shifted uncomfortably. They did not appreciate their proposals being dissected in such detail or having their intentions clearly exposed to the public. It was one thing to vote in favor of fiscal responsibility in principle. It was quite another to have the precise consequences of those votes laid bare and challenged publicly. Crockett's delivery was forceful, but her focus remained on facts and the impact on ordinary Americans. Her aim was to make clear that the bill, under the guise of promoting responsible budgeting, would lead to real, tangible harm for millions of families who depended on these programs. In this moment, her voice cut through political posturing, firm, precise, and unwavering. She used the facts to underscore her opposition, emphasizing her role not only as a legislator, but as a steward of crucial social programs that sustained the lives of countless individuals. The Republican side, realizing the depth of her knowledge and the clarity of her argument, naturally became more uncomfortable. They faced the awkward reality that their legislative intentions might be scrutinized and condemned from the floor. The drama was palpable, yet Crockett remained resolute, committed to defending her constituents and advocating for those whose voices often went unheard amid the louder debates of politics. It is indeed quite a task when someone takes it upon themselves to clarify and explain that, in essence, the bill being discussed involves a reduction in vital food aid for pregnant women. However, what truly draws my attention and causes concern, Jasmine continued with a firm yet composed voice, is the sheer hypocrisy embedded within the proposed legislation. Many of those supporting this bill are representatives from districts that significantly benefit from a range of federal assistance programs, which they now seek to diminish or eliminate. These politicians often emphasize the need to reduce government administrative expenses, presenting that as a necessity for fiscal responsibility. Yet, at the same time, they are committed to maintaining, or even increasing, spending on military installations and agricultural subsidies within their own regions, areas that serve their interests. Furthermore, while they propose cuts to food assistance targeted at impoverished families, those struggling to make ends meet, they are simultaneously eager to preserve and even expand tax incentives and breaks for wealthy corporations and big businesses, which are already thriving and profitable. This glaring contradiction, this double standard, is what Jasmine Crockett aimed to highlight with her pointed comments. Her sharp critique was unmistakable. The legislators' words often clash with their true priorities, revealing a pattern of serving the interests of the wealthy and powerful at the expense of the vulnerable and less fortunate. It was evident that she was delivering her message directly to their faces, not afraid to call out the hypocrisy lurking behind the rhetoric. Her words were not just an attack on the bill itself, but a moral indictment of the priorities that underpin it. The members supporting this legislation must have felt the sting of her accusations, and some even tried to interject with procedural questions, perhaps hoping to redirect or dampen her critique. Nevertheless, the speaker who was presiding at the moment, a fellow member of the House, acted swiftly to maintain order. The person who had temporarily relinquished the floor to Crockett, feeling the weight of her arguments, now heard a clear and firm warning. The presiding officer leaned into his microphone and issued a cautious but unmistakable directive. The gentleman will confine her remarks to the substance of the proposal and avoid characterizing the motives of other members. This was, in effect, a subtle but firm signal, an earlier warning shot, that any further departure from the technical discussion could lead to disciplinary action. House rules give presiding officers authority to call members out of order if they stray from relevant topics or impugn each other's motives. The implication was clear. The speaker was watching closely, ready to step in if Jasmine Crockett continued on the same path. But Crockett, undeterred by this procedural warning, responded with calm confidence. She smoothly pointed out, "Mr. Speaker, I am speaking strictly to the substance of the bill. I am quoting directly from the text of the legislation and discussing its policy implications." Her tone was composed and authoritative, signaling that she was not going to be silenced or silenced easily. She further added that if her colleagues on the other side of the aisle found the implications of the bill uncomfortable or unacceptable, perhaps they should reconsider their support or their votes altogether. Some Democrats in the chamber chuckled softly at her forthrightness, recognizing the truth in her words. Meanwhile, the presiding officer's face tightened visibly. This was a challenge to the status quo, and it caught their attention. Crockett had essentially called their bluff, exposing the discrepancy between their words and actions, and thereby making them look petty or superficial in their attempts to interrupt her. The presiding officer then gave her permission to continue, stating, "The gentlewoman may proceed," but with a stiff tone that emphasized the importance of adhering to the rules. This was the third round of her speech, and Jasmine chose to push even further, going deeper into her critique. She drew courage from the moment, her voice gaining more intensity and conviction. She emphasized the real-world impact of these legislative proposals, emphasizing that those policies are not just abstract numbers or political slogans, but concrete realities for families in her district and across the nation. "Let's be honest about whom this bill truly benefits and whom it harms," she declared. "Despite all the rhetoric about responsible fiscal management, this legislation primarily serves to protect and perpetuate spending that benefits the wealthiest among us, while simultaneously slashing programs designed to support working families, children, seniors, and vulnerable citizens." She reached into her notes and pulled out a chart to illustrate her point. According to the Congressional Budget Office, an authoritative source on federal fiscal matters, the tax provisions embedded in this bill will result in over $40 billion in savings for large corporations, while at the same time, around $28 billion will be cut from social support programs crucial for ordinary Americans. Her point was clear and stark. This means we are essentially transferring money from poor families, those already struggling to cover basic needs, and redirecting those funds to already profitable corporations that are enjoying substantial tax breaks. The tension in the chamber was mounting, and, visibly, members of the opposing side, the Republicans, appeared increasingly annoyed. Several of them conferred quietly among themselves, perhaps debating whether to challenge her for speaking out of turn or to attempt to restore order through parliamentary procedures. Crockett pressed on, emphasizing the urgency and reality of what these cuts truly mean. "In my district in Texas," she said, "there are families who depend daily on Medicaid to access health care. There are children who rely on free or reduced-price school lunch programs to get nutritious meals during the school day. And there are seniors who deeply need assistance with prescription drugs to manage their health conditions. This bill threatens to take away all of that, putting at risk the very support systems that countless families depend on simply because they are poor or vulnerable." Her gaze swept across the chamber, notably locking eyes with the Republican side, challenging them directly. "So I ask my colleagues across the aisle," she concluded, "when you go back to your districts and face those families, will you be able to tell them that you supported a bill that cuts their health care benefits and social services in order to give substantial tax breaks to big corporations? Will you honestly be able to justify that to your constituents, those who struggle day by day to survive, but who are now at risk because of this legislation?" Her words hung in the air, a powerful call to conscience amid the heated political debate, highlighting that this was not just about numbers or political strategies, but about the real lives of ordinary Americans. Imagine a scene taking place within the hallowed halls of a legislative assembly, where intense debates and sharp exchanges are commonplace. A question arises that might seem straightforward on the surface, but carries underlying importance. Will someone explain to expectant women why the process of hair removal, specifically the act of cutting a wick, has become a topic of discussion? Similarly, there's curiosity about whether officials will clarify to senior citizens why the prices of their prescription medications are continually climbing higher and higher. These are pressing issues that reflect ongoing concerns among the public, questions about transparency and fairness in policies that directly affect their daily lives. Meanwhile, the political atmosphere intensifies as the session enters its fourth round of vigorous opposition from the Republican side. This phase features a notable example of parliamentary dispute. A Republican representative, sitting among his colleagues, suddenly raises his voice to challenge the proceedings, calling out to the presiding officer with a formal, "Point of order, Mr. Speaker." Recognizing the gravity of such a gesture, the Speaker, Johnson, immediately turns his attention to the Speaker. He responds swiftly, acknowledging the Republican member and addressing his concern. The member from the Republican camp then proceeds to accuse a fellow representative from the opposing side, referred to here as the Gentlewoman, of misrepresenting a legislative proposal and of impugning the motives of various members engaged in debate. They demand that her remarks be stricken from the official record, considering them inappropriate or damaging to the decorum of the chamber. Such a move isn't taken lightly. It constitutes a serious challenge within parliamentary procedure. Should the chair, in this case Johnson, agree with this objection, then Crockett's entire speech, her arguments, explanations, and statements, could be formally erased from the official minutes. Furthermore, this ruling could result in her being barred from making any further statements on the topic at hand. Johnson, faced with this pivotal moment, pauses thoughtfully. He stands at a crossroads. He can choose to support his party's desire to silence her, thereby aligning with the Republican demand, or he can uphold the principles of fair debate, recognizing that siding with the objection might set a precedent, potentially leading to Crockett's entire speech being expunged and her being prevented from further participation. Johnson contemplates his decision carefully. He is aware that a quick acquiescence might be perceived as bias, especially by the Democratic members sympathetic to Crockett's stance. After a moment of deliberate consideration, Johnson announces that he will review the remarks in question. He states, with measured caution, that the member in question may continue her speech, but with strict conditions. She must refrain from impugning the motives of her colleagues and should focus solely on discussing policies and proposals. This decision represents a middle ground, a compromise designed to uphold the decorum of the chamber while respecting free speech within the bounds of parliamentary rules. As the proceedings progress into the fifth round of debate, the situation escalates further. Crockett, refusing to be silenced or intimidated, pushes beyond the limits. She confidently states that she is discussing policy specifics, clarifying what the legislative proposal actually entails and who stands to be impacted. She emphasizes that raising such concerns is part of a legitimate debate process. If certain members feel uncomfortable with her words, she contends, then that discomfort does not violate any rules. It simply reflects differing perspectives and the nature of democratic discourse. Drawing from her background, Crockett continues to establish her credibility. She admits that she has spent less than 2 years representing her constituents in Congress, but also reveals her extensive previous experience, over 15 years as a civil rights attorney. During that time, she read countless pages of legislation, argued cases before federal courts, and defended the constitutional rights of individuals and groups. This professional background lends weight to her assertions. When she critiques a legislative proposal, claiming that it prioritizes corporate interests over those of working families, her words are rooted in detailed analysis and factual evaluation, rather than mere partisanship. She prepares herself for the next stage of confrontation, sensing that things might soon become more heated. She notices Johnson growing visibly frustrated at her unwavering stance. To back up her points, she holds up the written legislation once again, inviting her colleagues to read and scrutinize it themselves. With a touch of sarcasm, she suggests that perhaps some members supporting the bill have not actually taken the time to understand its contents. They are voting based on talking points supplied by party leaders or on loyalty to their political side, rather than on a careful review of what the bill truly states. This sparks the sixth round, during which Johnson finally succumbs to pressure. The tension reaches a breaking point for him. As the chair overseeing the proceedings with a fragile majority and under constant pressure from his political right flank, he can no longer remain passive. He has been observing Crockett dismantle his party's legislative efforts with precision and conviction, and this frustration boils over. In a rare move, he interrupts her speech, an action that is rarely taken when a speaker has been properly recognized and has the floor. In a commanding yet restrained tone, Johnson calls for Crockett to suspend her remarks. She halts mid-sentence, raising her eyebrows in surprise and perhaps a touch of defiance as she looks up at the speaker. Johnson then leans forward, visibly displaying his aggravation. With a voice tinged with authority and a hint of irritation, he reminds her that despite her background as an attorney, this is not a courtroom, but the United States Congress, a place governed by centuries of established traditions and procedures. These rules, which have been in place for over 230 years, are designed to ensure order and respect during debates, and they must be honored. This moment encapsulates a classic clash within legislative chambers, the tension between individual expression and procedural discipline, between partisan strategies and institutional respect. It highlights the delicate balance that legislative leaders must maintain within a complex, often fractious environment, one where every word and action carries significant weight, shaping the history of governance and the lives of countless citizens. It was an unmistakably patronizing remark, one that everyone present in the chamber recognized immediately for what it truly was. The speaker was essentially implying that she should be humble, that she ought to recognize her place within the rigid hierarchy of the legislative chamber. In essence, he was suggesting, quite openly, that she should temper her confidence and accept her subordinate role in this formal setting. However, what followed was perhaps the gravest mistake of his political career, a miscalculation sparked by overconfidence and an underestimation of his opponent. The woman from Texas, a gentle yet steadfast figure, seemed to believe she held a deeper understanding of the intricacies of constitutional law than many of her colleagues who had devoted years to studying it diligently. Johnson, meanwhile, continued, his tone becoming sharper, more aggressive, as he responded. Perhaps she should devote less of her time to creating fleeting viral moments on social media, he seemed to suggest, and more of her energy to grasping how actual governance and administrative processes function in reality. This was no place for superficial online fame. This was the legislative chamber of the United States, the house where the powers of the people are truly exercised, a space that demands a certain level of knowledge, decorum, and respect. It was evident from his words that he doubted whether the woman in question truly understood these fundamental principles. A profound silence fell over the chamber immediately afterward. The members of the Democratic side appeared visibly stunned, their expressions betraying their shock at the audacity of such an outburst. Even some Republicans, usually more accustomed to partisan sparring, looked uncomfortable, unsure whether to applaud or disapprove. Johnson had crossed a significant line. What started as a matter of procedural guidance had devolved into a personal attack. He had questioned her credentials, dismissing her legal expertise as insignificant, implying that her social media activity was more important to her than her substantive understanding of law. He had accused her of being more interested in gaining fame then contributing meaningfully to legislative debates, and, notably, he suggested she lacked the depth of knowledge required to comprehend how administrative agencies and governmental processes truly operate. This pointed critique was not only insulting, but also condescending, as it challenged her professionalism and intellectual capacity in a very public setting. The room seemed to hold its breath, sensing the gravity of his words, a moment that might, in hindsight, be considered a critical error in judgment. For, in doing so, he had just verbally attacked a seasoned civil rights attorney and a scholar of constitutional law, someone who, in fact, had more extensive expertise in those areas than he did himself. Jasmine Crockett stood silently, momentarily letting his words hang in the air like a heavy cloud, almost as if she was considering her response carefully. And then, in an unexpected move, she did something that caught everyone off guard. She smiled. It was a calm, composed expression that conveyed confidence and resilience. Addressing the speaker directly, she said with measured clarity, "Mr. Speaker, I would like to respond to your characterization of my credentials. May I continue with my allotted time?" Her colleague, a fellow Democrat who had temporarily yielded her turn, quickly intervened, affirming, "The gentleman may continue." Johnson, realizing perhaps too late that he had fallen into a trap of his own making, hesitated briefly before responding. "The gentleman may proceed," he managed, but the certainty in his voice had diminished noticeably, tinged now with cautiousness. What transpired next was expected to be replayed countless times across social media platforms, destined to become a defining moment in contemporary congressional history. Jasmine Crockett was poised to deliver what many would call the most devastating rebuke ever directed at a sitting chairman in recent memory. She sat upright, took a deep breath, steadying herself as the entire chamber held its collective gaze upon her. The tension was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Everyone sensed that something significant was about to unfold. This was more than a simple parliamentary exchange. It was a moment that would mark her political trajectory forever. She adjusted her microphone slightly, focusing her attention squarely on Mike Johnson. Her voice, though calm and steady, carried an underlying steel that was impossible to miss. "Thank you, Mr. Speaker," she began, and her words were carefully chosen, infused with both respect and an unmistakable resolve. "You just questioned my understanding of constitutional law and implied that I should spend less time on social media and more time learning about how the administrative system actually operates." Her gaze remained fixed on him as she continued. "Allow me to respond to those points." She then reached into her notes, revealing that she had come prepared for this exact moment. "You graduated from Louisiana State University's Paul M. Hurt Law Center in 1998. That's a reputable institution." She paused briefly before adding, "Following that, you worked for the Alliance Defending Freedom, an organization known for its conservative religious stance and legal advocacy." Her words, delivered with calm precision, underscored her knowledge and level of preparation, while indirectly pointing out the significance of the different backgrounds and experiences they each represented. This was only the beginning of her carefully crafted refutation. She was about to turn the entire exchange into a memorable lesson in professionalism and resilience, demonstrating that dignity, knowledge, and composure remained the most effective tools in confronting hostility and ignorance in the highest legislative chamber in the land. Once again, we find ourselves witnessing a genuine act of legal proficiency and mastery of constitutional principles. Jasmine's manner of addressing the assembly was deliberate and composed, capturing everyone's attention from the very moment she stepped forward. She began by highlighting her substantial educational background, stating that she was an alumna of the University of Houston Law Center an institution renowned for its rigorous legal curriculum. Following her formal education, she dedicated an impressive 15 years of her professional life practicing as a civil rights lawyer, a field requiring not only deep legal knowledge, but also unwavering dedication to justice and equality under the law. During her tenure as a civil rights attorney, Jasmine had built a career grounded in defending the fundamental rights guaranteed by the Constitution. She notably argued cases related to the First Amendment, which safeguards freedoms of speech, religion, and assembly; the 14th Amendment, which guarantees equal protection under the law; the Fourth Amendment, protecting individuals from unlawful searches and seizures; and the Fifth Amendment, ensuring due process and protection against self-incrimination. She started enumerating specific cases she had been involved in, illustrating her extensive experience and deep familiarity with constitutional issues. Jasmine explained that her advocacy was not confined solely to the courtroom, as she had represented clients in federal courts, state courts, and appellate courts across different levels of the judiciary. She emphasized her track record of success, noting that she had won verdicts and secured legal precedents that had a lasting impact on Texas law. Her defense had included challenging unconstitutional searches conducted by police, combating discriminatory employment practices, and fighting to uphold voting rights for marginalized communities. The room was completely silent, every eye fixed on her. The gravity of her words and the clarity of her arguments left little room for doubt about her qualifications and experience. In a respectful but confident tone, Jasmine addressed the assembly, asserting that her practical knowledge of constitutional law, the how of applying it in real courtroom situations, rendered her more than qualified to speak on the matter. She even suggested that her experience exceeded that of her opponent, the individual who had raised constitutional challenges. Her point was clear. Her hands-on courtroom experience in defending constitutional rights gave her a unique competency that mere theoretical knowledge or political argumentation could never surpass. But Jasmine was not finished. Her eloquence and assertiveness only intensified. She pointed out that her opponent had invoked the centuries-long tradition and procedural rules of the legislative chamber, referencing the 230 years of history that underpin the legitimacy and procedures of their institution. While acknowledging this long-standing tradition, she pivoted to discuss constitutional law itself, specifically what the Constitution enshrines and what it requires from members of Congress. She lifted a pocket-sized copy of the Constitution, a familiar accessory carried by many representatives as a symbol of their constitutional oath. Jasmine explained that Article 1, Section 5 of the Constitution grants each House of Congress the authority to establish its own rules of proceedings. However, crucially, she pointed out that no matter how autonomous or self-regulating these rules might be, they still must conform to the overarching principles established by the Constitution itself, which includes protections like those found in the First Amendment. Turning her gaze directly toward Representative Johnson, Jasmine underscored that the First Amendment was designed to safeguard freedom of speech, including the speech of elected representatives on matters of public policy. She made it clear that serving as a member of Congress does not simply afford the right to speak. It also entails an active duty to communicate openly about legislative proposals, their implications, and their impact on the citizenry. While House rules do empower the presiding officer to ensure order and enforce procedural standards, they do not grant the authority to silence members merely because their arguments are disagreeable or inconvenient politically. Her assertion resonated across the chamber as several Democratic colleagues nodded affirmatively, recognizing the validity of her point. Even some Republicans, previously skeptical, appeared to be influenced by her calm, well-reasoned constitutional discourse. Jasmine demonstrated that she was capable of engaging in sophisticated legal reasoning on the spot, illustrating her command of constitutional law and her ability to articulate the principles underpinning free speech with clarity and authority, traits that are essential for anyone who seeks to uphold the constitutional values they are sworn to defend. When her opponent attempted to interrupt her, Insinuating that Jasmine lacked understanding of how administration and governance functions, she responded with unwavering steadiness. Jasmine stated unequivocally that what the opposition had perceived as enforcement of a House rule was, in reality, an attempt to intimidate her into silence. She clarified that such tactics were not legitimate legislative oversight, but rather acts of silencing a colleague, a move incompatible with the constitutional guarantees that protect the right to speak freely. Jasmine underscored that the act of silencing a member based on disagreements or ideological differences was fundamentally at odds with the constitutional principles of free speech and fair representation. Her rebuttal transitioned into an even more personal challenge. Jasmine addressed a specific accusation lobbed against her, that she was more interested in gaining social media attention than focusing on substantive legislative debates. She invited her critics to confront this claim directly. Yes, she acknowledged, her speeches sometimes go viral, an outcome she considered a testament to her clear, honest, and accessible communication. She explained that the reason for this widespread sharing was straightforward. She spoke transparently about how legislation directly impacts everyday people, avoiding the jargon and procedural complexity that often obscure policymaking from the public eye. Jasmine emphasized that her goal was always to clarify, not confound. She pointed to a recent legislative proposal, one that proposed cutting $28 billion from social programs, and explained that this was not merely a vague talking point, but explicitly stated within the bill's text. When she mentions this on the House floor, and the statement gets shared across social media platforms, she sees it as an affirmation of transparency. Far from performance or theatrics, her openness to publicly discussing the realities of legislation represents her commitment to accountability and honesty in governance. In every word she spoke, Jasmine underscored her conviction that advocating for her constituents and holding legislation to transparent scrutiny was not just her right, but her duty. Her ability to communicate complex issues in a straightforward manner, along with her unwavering adherence to constitutional principles, underscored her profound dedication to the ideals of democratic representation and justice. Imagine a scenario where more members of a legislative body took the time and effort to explain their votes in straightforward, accessible English, rather than resorting to convoluted legal jargon or evasive phrasing. If they did this, perhaps the American public, familiar with their language, their concerns, and their daily lives, would develop a deeper sense of trust and confidence in the workings of Congress. Amidst this atmosphere, a brief moment of acknowledgement occurred when a few Democrats expressed their approval through applause. However, those sounds of support were quickly stifled and silenced by the commanding sound of a gavel striking the desk, as Speaker Johnson sought to maintain order in the chamber. Yet, despite the abrupt interruption, the intended message had been delivered and understood by many present. The point of the remarks had clearly resonated. Turning now to the topic of understanding how government functions internally, Jasmine Crockett's voice sharpened as she continued her speech, emphasizing her point with a deliberate and firm tone. She made it clear that she believed it was essential to consider her relatively short tenure in her position. It was less than a year since she assumed the role of chair. Despite this brief time, she highlighted how she had already faced significant challenges, struggling to pass even basic legislation, encountering opposition and rebellion from within her own party's ranks, and having to rely on votes from Democrats to prevent a government shutdown. Her tone remained respectful throughout, yet her words carried a powerful, almost devastating impact, serving as a subtle but piercing critique of the leadership's effectiveness. In her speech, Jasmine seemed to be urging her colleagues to reflect more critically, not only on her abilities, but also on the approach to leadership that they themselves embodied. Instead of questioning whether she truly understood the intricacies of governance, perhaps it was more appropriate to scrutinize whether their methods and strategies actually fostered unity and productive results. Meanwhile, the Republican side of the chamber remained utterly silent, an impenetrable barrier of stoic indifference, or perhaps a mixture of agitation and contemplation. Some members appeared especially attentive, perhaps waiting anxiously to see whether Johnson, the Speaker, would respond to this unexpected challenge. Johnson, however, chose to sit quietly, his face flushing with redness, clearly taken aback by the intensity of the pushback. His expression betrayed his surprise. He had not anticipated being met with such a formidable and direct rebuttal, a figurative knockout punch delivered with precision. Yet, Jasmine Crockett's resolve was not yet exhausted, and she prepared to deliver her most impactful statement of the day, saving her most powerful critique for last. Addressing Mr. Speaker, she stated, her voice resonating strongly across the chamber. There is one more point I need to bring to your attention. Her words paused dramatically before she pressed on. You have now attacked my credentials, questioned my motives, and challenged my understanding of how government functions. She emphasized how this was not an isolated incident in the history of Congress. It was part of a troubling pattern experienced by women of color serving in legislative roles. She referenced prominent examples like Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, and others who had encountered similar dismissiveness and contempt. Leaning into her microphone, Jasmine articulated a poignant observation. There seems to be a recurring pattern where women of color, when speaking passionately and articulately about policy issues, are often dismissed and labeled as overly emotional, or accused of being more interested in social media notoriety than serious debate. She contrasted this with the experience of white male speakers, who, when they show similar passion, are often praised and portrayed as principled and resilient, attributes that are rarely afforded to women of minority backgrounds. The atmosphere in the chamber grew electric with these words, charged with a mixture of tension, recognition, and rising emotion. Jasmine clarified her stance clearly. This is no longer just about a proposed legislative bill. This is about the fundamental values of representation, dignity, and respect that our democracy should uphold. She was determined to make her point unequivocally. Then she addressed the chamber directly. And to be very clear, Mr. Speaker, Jasmine declared, her voice ringing through the chamber, I am not overly emotional. I am not unqualified for my position. I am not here to seek viral fame or fleeting attention. I am here because the people of Texas's 30th District elected me to serve and represent their interests. Her words echoed with the conviction of someone who understood her purpose and the weight of her role. I will continue to speak on their behalf loudly and clearly, she emphasized, regardless of whether this made others uncomfortable or challenged their perceptions. With a brief pause, she then delivered her final statement, a statement designed to leave a lasting impact. She said, If anyone prefers to have a genuine debate about constitutional law and the intricacies of governance, I am fully prepared to engage. But if your intention is merely to use your authority as chair to silence members who dare to challenge your party's legislation, if your goal is to suppress dissent and stifle legitimate discussion, then you are not upholding the noble traditions of this House. Instead, you are betraying them. No matter how much procedure or decorum you invoke, those actions cannot hide the truth of your behavior. As these words left her mouth, the chamber fell into an almost complete silence, an uneasy, heavy quiet that signified the impact of her righteous stand. The Democrats, witnessing this unparalleled display of courage and eloquence, sat stunned, momentarily rendered speechless by the power and clarity of her speech. The Republican members were visibly unsure of how to respond, their expressions mixed between frustration, bewilderment, and perhaps a hint of respect for the boldness she had shown. Meanwhile, the staff members at the back of the chamber, aware that this could be a pivotal moment, were frantically typing on their phones, probably predicting that this day, and perhaps this moment, would be remembered as a turning point. At the center of it all sat Mike Johnson, the speaker, behind his desk, his face a complex mask reflecting anger, embarrassment, and shock. He had entered this confrontation confident that he could impose order and silence opposition, assuming he would easily put Jasmine Crockett back in her place. Little did he realize that he was about to be confronted with a force that challenged not only his authority, but also the very integrity of the chamber's values and traditions. An encounter that would be remembered long after the day had ended. In a moment that would be remembered as a defining highlight in recent congressional history, Jasmine Crockett did more than simply participate in a typical debate. She utterly dismantled and exposed her adversary before the eyes of the entire nation, broadcast live across a broad television audience. Her sharp, articulate assault in the chamber left no room for ambiguity or retreat. The opposition figure attempted to respond, to voice a counterpoint, or defend his position. But he was momentarily paralyzed, unable to find the words. Instead, he looked down at his notes, searching for a foothold amid the chaos of the moment, then finally looked back up at Jasmine with a resigned expression. Without hesitation, he called an end to the exchange, stating that the gentleman's time for speaking had expired, and officially recognizing another member from California to continue the proceedings. He chose to move forward, seemingly unwilling to further engage with her provocative stance or confront her formidable arguments, likely realizing that any further attempt would only deepen his predicament. Jasmine Crockett's confrontational skill was on full display as she challenged him on constitutional law, unveiling his double standards and highlighting his attempt to silence her voice, all while she maintained impeccable composure and adhered strictly to the decorum and rules of the House. Her calm demeanor underscored her confidence, demonstrating that she had fully prepared herself for this moment of high tension. With her statements complete, she gracefully took her seat, her face composed and serene, as if the storm of controversy she had just ignited was merely a routine part of her work. Her words had already made their mark. Everyone present in the chamber was acutely aware that they had witnessed something truly historic, a rare occasion where a member of Congress not only spoke out, but also fundamentally challenged and exposed a political adversary in defense of constitutional principles. This exchange instantly sparked a whirlwind of activity on social media, and the ripple effects began spreading even before Jasmine Crockett sat down in her seat. Media professionals, congressional staffers, journalists, and countless viewers tuned into the broadcast on C-SPAN quickly took to their devices to share and analyze what had just transpired. Within a matter of minutes, barely enough time for a commercial break, multiple versions of the viral moment circulated across various platforms such as Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. Hashtags celebrating her courage and sharpness exploded in popularity, with countless posts emphasizing her brilliance. Some of the most common tags included Jasmine Crockett Donson Meltdown, Crockett Destroys Beaker, Queen Crockett, recalling her previous viral moments, and others like Crockett Schooling Johnson. The tone of these reactions was unambiguously admiring, with tweets and comments describing her performance as savage and masterful. For example, one account from Progressive Voice remarked that Jasmine Crockett had delivered the House chair a comprehensive lesson in constitutional law right before the entire chamber. Others, such as Legal Minds, a platform comprising attorneys and constitutional scholars, confirmed that her analysis was flawless and entirely accurate. The lawyer behind Legal Minds specifically pointed out that Johnson's attempt to silence her was confronted with her citing Article 1, Section 5 of the Constitution, alongside principles rooted in the First Amendment, fundamental rights ensuring free speech and limited government authority. It was emphasized that Crockett, a trained trial attorney and elected representative, effectively taught constitutional law in real time, leaving many onlookers with a newfound respect for her mastery of the legal foundations underpinning American governance. The platform Political Junkie also highlighted that Johnson's misunderstanding of how administrative and legislative processes work became glaringly apparent during the exchange. Meanwhile, a humorous tone was also prevalent, with some commentators noting that Johnson, who perhaps thought his title alone would intimidate Crockett, clearly underestimated her. Not only did she respond with factual precision and constitutional expertise, but she also did so with undeniable confidence, outperforming him while he sat silent, unable to adequately respond. Postings on more casual and meme-driven online communities further contributed to the viral sensation. Memes rapidly circulated, depicting Jasmine Crockett with exaggerated captions such as, "When the substitute teacher tries to talk down to the student who is actually a professor," or "Jasmine Crockett pulling out her credentials," accompanied by a gif of someone dramatically dropping papers. These images humorously underscored her formidable legal knowledge and quick wit, highlighting her as an embodiment of intelligence and resilience. Even among conservative-leaning outlets and social media accounts, there was an acknowledgement of her impressive display of constitutional mastery. Despite ideological differences, some Republican commentators admitted that Crockett's performance was undeniably impactful and, at times, devastatingly effective. They reiterated that Johnson's mistake was demeaning her with personal attacks or attempting to diminish her authority. Instead, political discourse should focus on policy and principles. Observers noted that his misstep opened him up to ridicule and further scrutiny. The internet's creative juices flowed abundantly, flooding the digital space with memes and GIFs that captured the intensity and wit of the moment. One popular meme depicted an image of Jasmine Crockett speaking passionately, accompanied by the caption, "When the substitute teacher tries to talk down to the student who's actually a professor." Another showed a GIF of someone dramatically dropping a pile of papers, captioned, "Jasmine Crockett pulling out her credentials," emphasizing the scene's theatrical yet impactful nature. All in all, the incident became more than just a fleeting political skirmish. It turned into a cultural moment that resonated widely, emphasizing the importance of constitutional knowledge, the strength of articulate advocacy, and the power of a well-prepared individual to challenge authority confidently in the modern political arena. Imagine a moment frozen in time, captured perfectly in a still image that shows Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, with an expression of complete shock and disbelief etched across his face. This particular screenshot freezes a moment right after Jasmine Crockett's final, pointed statement during a heated debate, with various captions highlighting the intensity of the exchange. It's as if the picture is a silent witness to a clash that left many viewers pondering the gravity of what had just transpired. The visual impression is powerful. Johnson's facial expression reveals that, at that instant, he realized he had just challenged the wrong person, a mistake that many in politics and legal circles now interpreted as a clear sign of him knowing that he had misjudged the depth and readiness of his opponent. In the very next moment, you could see the unmistakable sign of a man who knew he had made a miscalculation, perhaps even a blunder that could have repercussions beyond the immediate debate. It was as if the life had been drained from his usual composure, replaced by a dawning awareness that his authority was being tested and that he had perhaps overstepped his bounds. Such instances, when caught on camera, often serve as vivid reminders of how crucial preparation and understanding are in the world of politics, especially when engaging with formidable opponents. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to a humorous yet pointed comparison chart that was shared widely online. This chart placed side by side the professional credentials of Johnson and Crockett, sourced from Crockett's official information, demonstrating her more expansive experience within courtrooms and legal proceedings. Its caption underscored the importance of doing thorough research before engaging in verbal confrontations or disputes, suggesting that knowledge and preparation are the best tools in any debate. The chart isn't just a simple visual, but a symbolic reminder. In battles of ideas and arguments, knowing your opponent's background can make a decisive difference between winning and losing. Further adding to the satire and cultural commentary, there appeared a mock movie poster for a fictional film titled Constitutional Law 101. In this satirical poster, Jasmine Crockett is portrayed as a stern and wise professor, while Mike Johnson is depicted as the struggling student who is about to learn some hard lessons. The image hints at a humorous yet pointed critique of the exchange, implying that what took place was akin to an academic debate, and Crockett, representing legal and constitutional knowledge, was clearly on the winning side. Such satirical portrayals highlight how heavily the moment captured on camera resonated with the public and media alike. Indeed, the controversy drew immediate widespread media attention. Nearly every major news outlet covered the dramatic exchange on the House floor, where tensions flared visibly. It was a scene filled with fireworks, with Crockett and Johnson engaging in a verbal clash that many found both telling and instructive. Watching carefully, observers saw that Crockett's response was not merely passionate, but rooted in precise constitutional law, earning her praise from legal experts and scholars who appreciated her clarity. Her sharp analysis and confident rebuttal turned what could have been a routine debate into an instructional moment for viewers, demonstrating the importance of foundational legal knowledge in political discourse. The event was so impactful that even mainstream media personalities dedicated airtime to analyze its significance. For example, Lawrence O'Donnell on MSNBC devoted a segment to examining Crockett's arguments and her composure under pressure. His commentary highlighted that this was more than just a fleeting political spat. It was a teachable example illustrating how expertise and credibility matter greatly when engaging in debates of constitutional importance. Crockett's display of mastery served as a reminder: when you challenge someone on substantive legal principles, you must be prepared for equally substantive responses. Some media outlets attempted to frame the exchange differently. Fox News, for instance, highlighted how the Democratic representative's fierce retort was viewed by some as a breach of decorum, an unseemly display of hostility from the opposing side. Yet, even within their coverage, clips from the actual exchange showed that Crockett's points were well-founded and legitimate, casting doubt on any claims of disrespect. The emphasis gradually shifted from mere politics to the substance of her arguments, emphasizing their legal rigor. In-depth analysis continued in print and online. The Washington Post published a detailed piece titled "How Jasmine Crockett Won a Constitutional Debate with the Speaker," which provided a comprehensive breakdown of the exchange. The article quoted numerous constitutional law professors, praising Crockett's arguments and scrutinizing Johnson's approach. This analysis underscored the notion that Crockett's readiness and grasp of constitutional principles had played a pivotal role in framing her as the more knowledgeable and composed participant in that debate. Similarly, the New York Times explored Johnson's tactical misstep, illustrating how his attempt to address the issue with personal attacks and dismissive tactics ultimately backfired. Their analysis pointed out that Johnson, perhaps inexperienced as a chairman, chose to confront Crockett with a personal approach instead of adhering to procedural norms. Such an approach failed to serve him well, especially given Crockett's skillful responses rooted in constitutional law. This episode served as a clear lesson. In politics, attacking individuals rather than engaging with their arguments can often undermine one's position and credibility. Inside Capitol halls, there was further insight into how Crockett's measured and articulate response left Johnson momentarily at a loss for words. Interviews with members from both parties revealed a shared respect for Crockett's composure and legal command. Many Democrats praised her restraint and clarity, while some Republicans even privately admitted that Johnson had stepped into a trap by engaging so personally. These reactions made it clear that the moment was not merely about a clash of personalities, but about the significance of knowledge, presence of mind, and constitutional understanding in high-stakes debates. Legal scholars and constitutional law experts weighed in extensively on the incident. Professor Lauren Tribe from Harvard Law School tweeted that Crockett's constitutional analysis was spot on, emphasizing that Article 1, Section 5 of the Constitution does give Congress authority to set rules and procedures. However, she pointed out that those rules must always align with First Amendment protections. Johnson's attempt to silence Crockett, her tweeted comment implied, was questionable at best, and potentially a violation of constitutional principles. Legal commentators, including Professor Erwin Chemerinsky, expressed admiration for Crockett's quick and precise articulation of constitutional principles under pressure, recognizing this as a hallmark of true legal expertise. In an interview with CNN, Chemerinsky remarked that Crockett's ability to clearly and accurately lay out constitutional points on the spot demonstrated her deep understanding of the law, setting her apart from those who rely solely on talking points. The national legal community responded positively, with the National Bar Association issuing a statement praising Crockett's eloquent defense of fundamental constitutional principles and criticizing any attempts to silence her through procedural overreach. Overall, what emerged from this episode was a clear lesson that genuine expertise, confidence, and an understanding of constitutional fundamentals can decisively shape public perceptions and even influence political narratives. Jasmine Crockett's performance on that floor not only showcased her legal acumen, but also underscored the importance of preparedness and substance over superficiality in the often tumultuous realm of political debate. In a recent commentary published in an op-ed piece, former federal judge Nancy Gertner eloquently remarked, "Speaker Johnson learned a lesson that seasoned trial lawyers understand very well. Never challenge someone's credentials unless you are absolutely certain that your own are more substantial and defensible." This insightful observation sheds light on the recent tumultuous events in Congress, where the credibility and qualifications of members became a focal point of intense debate and controversy. The courtroom experience of Representative Crockett had demonstrated her ability to methodically construct her argument with precision, skillfully navigating the complexities of the ongoing discussion. She presented her case in a clear, structured manner, culminating in a compelling closing statement that left a lasting impression. It was a display of professionalism and knowledge that showcased her mastery of the issues at hand, particularly her deep understanding of constitutional law and legislative procedure. In stark contrast, House Speaker Mike Johnson found himself unable to effectively counter the failure of his own damage control efforts in the aftermath of the heated exchange. His office quickly sprang into crisis mode, releasing a series of statements throughout the day in an attempt to mitigate the fallout. The first of these statements attempted to portray the situation as a mere reminder to all members to adhere to House decorum and to stay focused on substantive policy discussion, rather than personal conflicts. However, this explanation was met with skepticism and outright disbelief by the online community, making it clear that many perceived the incident as something far more serious and personal than mere procedural disagreement. The speaker's initial remark was that Representative Crockett apparently misjudged how the workings of the administration operate, which is an issue related to decorum and understanding of legislative processes. Nonetheless, critics argued that this was an evasion and a weak attempt to dismiss the real crux of the matter. Johnson publicly questioned Crockett's qualifications, and in doing so, he revealed a personal bias rather than a concern for parliamentary discipline. When pressed to own up to this, the spokesperson's attempt at justification fell flat, exposing more about the underlying tensions than about any procedural lapse. His second official statement aimed to emphasize that he respects all members of Congress and their contributions, even amid disagreements. Johnson asserted that while occasional procedural disagreements occur, he values every member's perspective and strives to maintain civility. Yet, the reaction on social media swiftly undermined this claim. Many pointed to the fact that Johnson had called Crockett unqualified face-to-face, an aggressive move, only to later issue a mildly worded and seemingly insincere statement of respect. This inconsistency was perceived as a lack of genuine courage or conviction, prompting widespread critique of his leadership and integrity. In an attempt to minimize the incident, Johnson issued a personal response where he sought to frame the exchange as part of the intense, spirited nature of congressional debates. He stated, "Yesterday, we saw some heated exchanges, which are common in vigorous discussions on Capitol Hill. I hold great respect for every member, including Representative Crockett." When a journalist asked whether he regretted having questioned her credentials, Johnson deflected, emphasizing instead the importance of focusing on the substantive legislative work. Another journalist pressed further, pointing out that his personal challenge to her understanding of constitutional matters was not merely procedural, but fundamentally personal. Johnson responded by asserting that Crockett demonstrated her grasp of constitutional law, perhaps even better than he did, before cutting off the question abruptly. This partial attempt at clarification only heightened the impression that he was trying to downplay the incident, but his evasiveness only served to make the situation worse. His unwillingness to directly address the core issue, coupled with his perceived tone-deaf response, suggested he had been visibly rattled and that Crockett's sharp critique had clearly struck a nerve. The ripple effects of this exchange extended well beyond the immediate confrontation, impacting congressional politics across party lines. Democratic leaders seized upon the opportunity to bolster their position, with Representative Hockey Jeff publicly praising Crockett during a press conference. He lauded her as a prime example of what it means to stand up for one's constituents with intelligence, courage, and a solid understanding of constitutional principles. He emphasized that her actions reflected true congressional integrity, and that her willingness to confront such challenges demonstrated her commitment to the people she represents. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez took to social media to express her support as well, sharply criticizing Johnson's attempts to dismiss Crockett's expertise. She tweeted, "This is what happens when efforts are made to silence women, especially women of color, within Congress. Jasmine Crockett doesn't just stand back silently. She educates and fights back with confidence and integrity. That's real power in action." Meanwhile, Pramila Gipal, chair of the Progressive Caucus, highlighted a critical lesson learned from this episode. Credentials and expertise genuinely matter in legislative debates. She pointed out that you cannot bully or dismiss individuals who possess real knowledge and understanding of the issues at hand. The episode uncovered a fundamental truth about respect and competence, that those who truly know their subject cannot be silenced or undermined easily, regardless of pressure to conform or adapt. On the other side of the ideological spectrum, many Republican members publicly voiced their support for Johnson, framing his actions as a defense of decorum and procedural norms. However, behind the scenes, more than a few expressed frustration and disappointment. An anonymous Republican congressional member stated to the Hill newspaper that Mike Johnson made this situation more complicated than it needed to be. He could have simply moved past it instead of making it personal. Several insiders confessed that Johnson's focus on attacking Crockett's qualifications, rather than engaging with her substantive arguments, had backfired, damaging his credibility and drawing unnecessary attention and controversy to the proceedings. Some moderate Republicans, wishing to maintain party unity and avoid public discord, quietly reached out to Crockett's office afterward. They offered apologies for Johnson's comments and expressed their admiration for her knowledge and professionalism. Such private acknowledgments, although unpublicized, reflected an awareness among more centrist members of the importance of respecting genuine expertise and the damage caused when political tactics cross personal boundaries. This episode served as a stark reminder that, in the high-stakes environment of Congress, credibility and the mastery of one's subject are security measures in their own right. It underscored the reality that personal attacks based on qualifications can ignite a firestorm that transcends partisan lines, stirring reactions from across the political spectrum and influencing the discourse far beyond the immediate incident. More than anything, it highlighted the importance of integrity, courage, and respect in the rough-and-tumble world of legislative politics, qualities that, once demonstrated, can elevate a member's standing and serve as a powerful example of true leadership. Of course, the event was not conducted in front of the public eye. It was happening behind closed doors, away from the gaze of journalists and the watching crowd. Still, even in this secret sphere, the messages exchanged through discreet channels made it clear that the woman's perspective had been recognized as correct. These back-channel communications served as quiet affirmations among insiders, signaling a shift in the underlying power dynamics that had been previously in place. As a result of this tacit acknowledgement, the overall atmosphere within the congressional environment underwent a notable transformation. Following this pivotal incident, Johnson's demeanor and approach to presiding over sessions became visibly different. No longer did he seem as dismissive or as quick to interrupt members as he once was. His typical readiness to interject and assert authority through editorial comments from the speaker's chair diminished significantly. Instead, he adopted a more measured, cautious style, carefully choosing his words and actions. Crockett, the young member involved in the confrontation, had effectively changed the way he performed his role, altering his posture, speech, and the manner in which he exercised authority. This behavioral shift was no small matter because it had direct repercussions for Johnson's leadership position. The incident's impact on Johnson's authority as the speaker was profound. The legitimacy of his role relies heavily on the respect he commands and the perception of his competence among colleagues and the public alike. When a figure in such a position is publicly challenged and corrected, particularly by a less experienced member, it undermines their perceived strength. Being publicly schools, or corrected by a comparatively junior colleague, cast doubt on Johnson's ability to lead effectively. It was as if his authority had been momentarily diminished, revealing vulnerabilities even in the most seasoned leaders. This apparent loss of confidence and authority did not go unnoticed by other members of the party. Within just a few weeks, some of the more far-right factions within the Republican ranks began floating ideas, discussions in hushed tones, and tentative proposals about replacing Johnson as Speaker. While these talks did not escalate into concrete action or gain widespread traction, their mere existence signaled that Johnson's position was no longer as secure as it had been. The very fact that such notions were being publicly considered pointed to a serious weakening of his standing within the party hierarchy. It exposed cracks in his leadership that opposition voices aimed to exploit. Meanwhile, Johnson's strategic approach to parliamentary procedure and floor debates became more cautious. He started to avoid direct confrontations with Democratic members during the intense moments of floor discussions, recognizing the risk of further public embarrassments or challenges. Instead of engaging in fiery editorial comments or unsolicited judgments, he increasingly relied on procedural tools and rulings to manage proceedings. This shift was a strategic attempt to maintain control without provoking additional conflicts, though it also made him appear more reserved and less authoritative. His actions became more scripted, with less room for spontaneous personality or personality-driven leadership, which inadvertently made him seem even weaker in the eyes of observers and colleagues. The media, always eager to scrutinize the speaker's every move, intensified their watchfulness after this incident. Journalists and commentators observed every session to see whether Johnson would find himself in another confrontation or display further signs of faltering leadership. As a consequence, Johnson began to adopt a more guarded manner, carefully controlling his facial expressions and speech, and adhering strictly to prepared scripts. This more reserved demeanor, though a practical response to ongoing scrutiny, also contributed to a perception of diminished strength. The more he restrained his natural personality, the more he seemed to confirm doubts about his capacity to lead decisively. Relations between Johnson and Democratic leaders deteriorated further following this episode. The once tentative cooperation that had existed, however fragile, became even more fragile and strained. Democrats started to see Johnson less as a fair and reasonable interlocutor, and more as someone inclined to silence opposition when it suited his purpose. The perception shifted from a leader willing to listen to one who now appeared to be attempting to suppress dissent, especially when challenged. This erosion of trust made bipartisan negotiations and cooperation increasingly difficult, with negotiations now characterized by suspicion and rigidity rather than mutual respect. At the same time, Crockett's role and public profile experienced a remarkable surge. The incident catapulted her into the national spotlight. Her courageous stand during the confrontation resonated widely, and it was followed closely by a surge in campaign fundraising activity. Within just the week after the incident, her campaign amassed over $3 million from small-dollar donors across the country. Many contributors sent notes expressing admiration and support, messages such as, "Thank you for standing up to bullies," and "You make me proud to identify as a Democrat." This tide of financial support reflected a broad base of appreciation and solidarity with her stance, further elevating her status within her party and beyond. Recognizing her growing influence and potential, leadership took steps to give Crockett more significant responsibilities. Despite her status as a sophomore member, she was entrusted with more prominent committee assignments, an indication of the faith they had in her capabilities to handle high-pressure situations and her undeniable media presence. Her visibility on television, podcasts, and interviews grew rapidly. She was often invited to appear on major news programs, where her articulate responses and unflappable demeanor made her a sought-after voice in Democratic messaging efforts. Her ability to defend her positions convincingly under pressure established her as an effective surrogate for her party. Before this incident, Crockett was primarily known within political circles, making her a familiar face among seasoned insiders, but relatively unknown to the broader public. Afterward, however, her name became a household one. She gained widespread recognition, with many individuals who had never encountered her publicly now following her activities on social media, eagerly watching her speeches and interviews. Her example inspired a new generation, especially young women of color, many of whom reached out personally to share how her courage and advocacy motivated them to pursue their own ambitions. Law schools invited her to speak, and bar associations awarded her honors for her contributions. She became more than just a rising star. She turned into a symbol of using one's expertise and voice to stand firmly for justice and fairness. The broader implications of this entire episode extended beyond the individual stories involved. The confrontation between Johnson and Crockett illuminated several significant trends observable in contemporary politics. Foremost among these was the increasingly vital role of expertise and the importance of standing up for one's convictions. Crockett's deliberately principled stance and her subsequent rise emphasized that knowledge, competence, and courage could, and often did, translate into power and influence. It underscored a growing recognition that leaders and representatives who demonstrate mastery and integrity are crucial in shaping political discourse and public trust. In today's world, where rapid snippets of information and quick social media bites dominate the landscape of communication, the importance of genuine knowledge and understanding remains undiminished. Despite the prevalence of superficial commentary and fleeting trends, true expertise continues to hold significant weight, especially when it is demonstrated through a deep comprehension of complex subjects. In this particular instance, Crockett secured a decisive victory in a public exchange precisely because she possessed a more thorough and nuanced grasp of constitutional law than her opponent Johnson. Her credentials and expertise, rooted in real experience and thorough preparation, ultimately proved more authoritative than empty assertions of power or status. This serves as a vivid reminder that legitimate qualifications, substantiated by practical experience, often outweigh mere authoritative posturing. It is essential to understand that we should approach such confrontations without making them overly personal. Sometimes, the way a dispute is framed can significantly influence its outcome. Johnson's critical mistake was to shift the focus from substantive policy discussion to attacking Crockett's personal qualifications. Instead of addressing the core issues at hand, he sought to undermine her credibility by questioning her credentials. In doing so, Johnson played into her hands, as Crockett had every right, and indeed the obligation, to defend her qualifications and demonstrate her competence. As a result, she was able to clearly and convincingly compare her background and experience to his, and in that comparison, she emerged victorious. This was a moment that fundamentally challenged the traditional expectations of political decorum. The traditional rules of conduct in Congress have long presumed that junior members should defer to their seniors, especially in situations where authority and experience are at stake. Seniority was regarded as the primary source of influence, and those with less experience were expected to remain submissive. However, a new generation of members, exemplified by Crockett, refuses to accept this outdated model. They believe that respect and influence should be earned through competence, knowledge, and actual performance, rather than automatically granted based on years in office. This shift signifies a move toward a more meritocratic approach within legislative bodies, emphasizing the power of preparation and expertise as the true sources of influence. Crockett's success in that viral moment, like many of her previous portrayals in public contexts, was rooted in her meticulous readiness. She understood constitutional law intimately, having prepared thoroughly for any attacks on her credentials. When Johnson or others challenged her, she responded confidently, armed with facts, examples, and a clear argument that showcased her mastery of the subject. Her preparedness allowed her to capitalize on the situation, turning an initial confrontation into a demonstration of her knowledge and resilience. Her ability to stay composed and factual in the heat of the moment exemplifies the power of thorough preparation and expertise. In our modern era, social media has become an equalizing force that can drastically alter the dynamics of political confrontation. While traditional authority, such as the power of the speaker's chair or formal political influence, still holds weight, it no longer guarantees victory in a public dispute. Johnson, as the speaker, possesses significant institutional authority, but Crockett's own influence is amplified by the reach and immediacy of the internet. Her viral moment spread rapidly, resonating with a broad audience and compelling public opinion. It demonstrated that in contemporary politics, a well-timed, powerful statement on social media can sometimes overshadow the significance of formal titles or positions. A compelling speech, when delivered with confidence and backed by facts, can, in certain instances, matter more than traditional power and hierarchy. Several months after the incident, the effects of this confrontation continue to be felt. The incident has entered the collective consciousness of political commentators and strategists, becoming a frequent reference point in discussions about decorum, competence, and the new dynamics of influence within Congress. The phrase, "Don't pull a Mike Johnson," has emerged as shorthand among political consultants and observers, warning against overreach or unnecessarily aggressive challenges to colleagues' expertise. Johnson still holds the position of Speaker, but his authority has been visibly diminished. More cautious and less confident than before, he now operates under the constant awareness that any misstep could result in another viral moment that undermines his credibility. His actions are now more calculated, often more reserved, as he navigates a political landscape where public perception can shift instantaneously. Meanwhile, Crockett continues to serve her district with unwavering dedication, embodying the qualities of intelligence, resilience, and principled advocacy. Her legislative record includes the introduction of meaningful bills and the formation of coalitions that amplify her voice within Congress. Her rise is not solely due to her confrontations, but also because she has demonstrated genuine leadership, strategic thinking, and a capacity to rally support around her initiatives. These accomplishments, combined with her fearless exchanges with figures like Johnson, have cemented her position as a significant and influential member of Congress. Her success underscores that resilience and authenticity can reinforce a politician's legitimacy, even amidst intense political theater. Despite the occasional necessity to work together, given the realities of legislative collaboration, there is an evident lack of warmth or genuine rapport between Crockett and Johnson. Johnson treats her with formal civility, adhering to the norms of respectful decorum, having learned through painful experience not to question her credentials publicly again or attempt to silence her voice. The earlier episode served as a stark lesson. If you challenge Jasmine Crockett, you should be prepared for her to counter twice as forcefully, armed with facts, evidence, and an unwavering resolve. She always comes prepared, with supporting documentation and evidence to back her statements, and she knows how to leverage her knowledge effectively. In conclusion, this remarkable confrontation has sparked widespread discussion about the evolving nature of influence and authority within the political arena. What are your thoughts on this intense showdown? Do you believe Mike Johnson overstepped by attacking Crockett's qualifications, or do you think her swift and vigorous response was overly harsh? Share your honest opinion below, as this debate invites diverse perspectives on the limits of political conduct and the importance of expertise. If this incident left you inspired or amazed, consider reflecting on what it reveals about the power of preparation, social media influence, and the changing face of leadership in modern politics. Let us consider your predictions for upcoming political matchups. Do you have any thoughts on which debates or confrontations might unfold in the near future? If you're interested in witnessing more memorable moments featuring Jasmine Crockett, the formidable congresswoman known for her sharp wit and unwavering resolve, you might want to explore our comprehensive playlist dedicated entirely to her most notable appearances and speeches. Among her many defining moments, her face-off with Nancy Mace, affectionately dubbed the Receipt Queen for her meticulous scrutiny of documents, stands out, as does her direct and unflinching exchange with Mitch McConnell, the long-serving Senate leader, whose often stoic, almost frozen expression has become something of a symbol in political discourse. Throughout her career on the floor, Jasmine Crockett has delivered some of the most pointed and impactful speeches in Congress, making her reputation as a formidable, fearless debater. Her rise to becoming one of the chamber's most respected voices stems from her extraordinary ability to challenge powerful figures, refusing to be intimidated or silenced. Such moments serve as an important lesson, not only within the political arena, but also in everyday life. The key takeaway from Crockett's example is the importance of confidence in your own expertise. Never allow anyone to sow doubt about your qualifications or to undermine your knowledge, especially when you are well-versed and confident in your field. Jasmine Crockett has clearly demonstrated that the most effective response to anyone questioning your competence isn't anger, defensiveness, or a display of frustration, but rather a calm, composed assertion of your expertise. She exemplifies how maintaining composure under scrutiny can be a powerful weapon, enabling you to communicate more convincingly and to reinforce your authority without resorting to emotional outbursts. In our day-to-day lives, whether in professional settings, negotiations, or debates, adopting this calm demeanor can significantly enhance your influence and credibility. Here are 5 important lessons inspired by Crockett's approach, lessons that you can start applying in your own life today. First, know your subject thoroughly. Crockett's victory in her argument was largely because she possessed a deeper understanding of constitutional law than her opponent. This is a universal principle. Regardless of the specific field or industry you work in, strive to become so knowledgeable and skilled that it becomes impossible for others to question your competence legitimately. Second, do not let titles or high-ranking positions intimidate you. For instance, during her debate, Crockett refused to be cowed by the fact that the chairman of the House, one of the most influential and powerful roles in government, questioned her expertise. She trusted her knowledge and stood her ground, unaffected by the authority that might have otherwise made others hesitant. The third lesson is to compare credentials thoughtfully and confidently when challenged. When Representative Johnson, who held a prominent position as chair, questioned Crockett's qualifications, she responded by clearly outlining her own background and expertise, establishing that her knowledge was, in fact, more substantial. Her approach demonstrates that when someone attacks your qualifications, your best response isn't just to defend yourself, but to clarify, with evidence, why your background makes you more qualified and credible. Fourth, maintain emotional control, even when you're being publicly dismissed or dismissed in a dismissive manner. Crockett remained composed throughout her exchange, understanding that emotional restraint not only strengthens your arguments, but also diminishes the effect of those attempting to undermine you by attacking emotionally. Finally, the fifth lesson involves calling out double standards and systemic biases. Crockett was quick to highlight how women of color in Congress are subjected to different, often harsher standards than their white male counterparts. Recognizing and vocalizing such patterns of discrimination transforms individual confrontations into broader discussions about systemic inequality. This kind of awareness is vital because it shifts the focus from personal conflicts to addressing the underlying issues of bias and injustice, making the conversation more meaningful and impactful. In essence, Jasmine Crockett exemplifies the importance of standing firm in your truth and expertise, especially in environments where authority and titles are often used to intimidate or silence. Whether you find yourself in a workplace meeting, courtroom, classroom, or legislative chamber, Remember that genuine knowledge and honesty are more compelling than any title or position. The world requires more individuals willing to challenge wrongful authority, to speak out against bias, and to advocate for fairness and justice. This mindset not only advances your personal growth, but also contributes to a more equitable society. As a final note, consider this: staying informed about what truly happens inside Congress helps foster an active and engaged citizenry. It's crucial to see beyond partisan narratives and to understand the real issues, debates, and convictions shaping our democracy. By doing so, you empower yourself with knowledge and become a more effective participant in civic life. Before concluding, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments section. If you could witness Jasmine Crockett debate any politician in a showdown over constitutional law, who would you choose? Drop your ideal matchup below and tell us which political confrontation you're most eager to see covered next. Remember, democracy functions best when people are well informed about the genuine happenings in Congress, not just the filtered stories crafted by partisan media. Stay engaged, stay aware, and we look forward to bringing you more insightful analyses of the political landscape in the future.